All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been going through and creating a series of video presentations based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. We're almost done with the first part of talking about web forms. So these core forms learning pathway, I've gone through the first 10 of the 11 lessons, and now we're on sending form data. So let's jump into that. And as it says, once the form has been validated on the client side, it's okay to submit the form. Since we covered validation previously, we're ready to submit. The article looks at what happens when the user submits a form. In other words, where does it go? How does it get handled when it gets there? We also look at security concerns associated with sending form data. First, we discuss what happens to the data when the form is submitted. And the example that they show here is pretty simplistic. At its most basic form, the web uses client-server architecture. Remember, you're the client. You send an HTTP, meaning an Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or an HTTPS, an Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure request that gets sent to a server. The server may act on it directly. The server may have to pass it off to another server, but eventually it should come back to the server, which gives it back as an HTTP or an HTTPS response back to the client. So that's what they're saying in here. I'm not going to read this to you. An HTML form on a web page is nothing more than a convenient, user-friendly way to configure an HTTP request to send data to the server. This enables the user to provide information to be delivered in the HTTP request. All right, it says to get a better idea how this works, reads our server-side website programming for steps module. I don't know if we go into that in here or not, but feel free to take a look at that, of course. On the client side, defining how to send the data. The form element defines how the data will be sent. The action attribute that's in there defines where the data gets sent. This must be a valid relative or absolute URL. If this attribute isn't provided, the data will be sent to the URL of the page containing the form, meaning the current page. All right. So you can put in a full absolute URL. If you're already on the website, you can go relative to where you currently are. All right. And as it says, when specified with no attributes, it goes right to the page you're currently on. Now, look at the note here. It's possible to specify a URL that uses HTTPS. Again, that's the secure protocol. When you do this, the data is encrypted along with the rest of the request, even if the form itself is hosted on an insecure page accessed through HTTP. On the other hand, if the form is hosted with HTTP with an action attribute, all browsers displaying a security warning to the user each time they try to send the data that it won't be encrypted. All right. The names and values of the non-file form attributes are sent as name equal value pairs. All right. The action, you're going to see this in just a minute. The action value should be a file on the server that can handle the incoming data. The server then responds, generally handling the data and loading the URL defined by the action attribute. How this is done depends on the method attribute. Now, as you're going to see, there's a get and there's a post. We're going to get through at least that far in this lesson. Now, what's the difference between these? Notice the get method is the method used by the browser to ask the server to send back a given resource, get something. In other words, I want you to give me something. Post, on the other hand, is when you are sending something. So as it says, you're saying, hey, server, I want this resource. It says, consider the following form. All right, you'll notice here the method is get. It says, since the get has been used, you'll see on there something like this. Now, this is the address. That's the URL. Everything from the question mark on is referred to as the query string. So if we fill this out and we put in there hi and we put in there mom, that means that we've got an attribute named say all right? And it's got a value of high, and we've got a value of an attribute of 2, and it's got a value of mom, all right? Now it says, since the get has been used, you'll see the URL www.foo.com, which is what they saved this in. So that's where I want it to go. There isn't a foo.com, so that's why you get that error message. All right, but they did append the stuff onto the query string. So as it says, the data is appended to the URL as a series of name-value pairs. After the URL web address is ended, we include the question mark followed by the name-value pairs, each one separated by an ampersand. In this case, as mentioned, we're trying to pass 2 pieces of data to the server, and they're the 2 I mentioned to you. So the request is going to look like this. There's the get, and there's the host that it's trying to go to. All right. Now, on the other hand, when you work with post, it's different. Rather than you receiving something from a server, you are sending something from or to a server. So as it says here, the post method is a little different. It's the method the browser uses to talk to the server when asking for a response that takes into account the data provided in the body of the HTTP request. As mentioned there, if a form is sent using this method, the data is appended to the body of the HTTP request. So in this case, we've got the same stuff, but the method is post. So you'll notice how this changes. When the form is submitted using the post method, you get no data appended to the URL. So when we looked at this one, and we looked up here, that was appended right there. When we look down here, does not happen that way. The content length header indicates the size of the body, and the content type indicates the type of resource that's being sent, in this case, a URL encoded form. All right. Viewing HTTP requests. Now, you can go in, right mouse click, and go into your inspect to do this. And when you do that, you will come down here, or you will go to the network tab as they show right there. All right. Close this. Oops. All right. So HTTP requests are never displayed to the user. If you want to see them, you've got to use tools like Chrome Developer Tools. That's what I just showed you. As an example, your form data will be shown as follows in the Chrome Network tab. So it says after you submit the form and you open this and you select Network and All, you'll see something like this. That looks very similar to the information that you saw previously. The only thing displayed to the user is the URL called. As mentioned above, with a GET request, the user will see the data in the URL bar, but with a POST request, they won't. That's important for 2 reasons. Now, the first one, as they mentioned there, the first reason that is important is if you need to send any sensitive data, you do not ever use a GET method. You always use a POST. Second, GET is typically, it has a character limit where POST typically doesn't. So POST is secure. You're never guaranteed with GET that it will be secure. All right. Then once it gets to the server side, you've got to retrieve it. Now with the example they show in here, they use PHP. This is not a language that we teach here at Rankin Technical College, but hopefully it makes enough sense that we can at least run through the example and it'll make some sense to you. So let's see here. We don't have much to go, so I think I'm just going to finish it all up right here. So PHP, as it says, offers some global objects to access the data. Assuming you've used the POST method, the following example takes the data and displays it to the user. All right, so it says we're using POST. We want to use say, we're running that through the HTML special chars function, and we're giving it to a variable called $say. Variables in PHP start with a $sign. Then we're doing the same thing with the to, and then we're just echoing them out. So this should be hi and mom or whatever the heck that was. There you go. Now it says this example won't work when you load it into a browser locally. In other words, what you have to do is you have to use some kind of a package, and the one I usually use isn't even shown here. The one I use is called XAMPP or XAMPP. But what that does is it allows you to use your computer as both a client and as a server. And then when you do that, you're able to run this. All right, I'm going to skip the Python because this is not a Python class. All right, other languages and frameworks. There are other ones that you can use. We use the Express in our AWD 1111 class, which is our database-driven web development class. We don't do anything with Django, Laravel, or Ruby on Rails. As it says, it is beyond the scope of this article, or really this whole series, to teach you any server-side language, but they will have a thing in here on Node later. All right. Okay, then a special case, sending files. Sending files with HTML forms is a special case. Files are considered binary data, which means you cannot open them up with a regular text file, as opposed to all other data which is sent as text data, which you can. Because HTTP is a text protocol, there are special requirements you need to follow for handling binary data. The ENC type, or ENC type, short for encrypt, lets you specify the content type HTTP header included in the request generated when the form is submitted, as it says. This is very important because it tells the server what kind of data is being sent. By default, as we saw earlier, form URL encoded. All right, it means this is form data encoded into URL parameters. If you want to send files, as mentioned here, you've got to add these 3 steps. You have to set the method to post. You have to set the ENC type to multi-part form data because, as it says, it'll split it into multiple parts. One for the text and one for the non-text. And include one or more input type equal types of things. And they show that right here. Now, again, this is fairly complex stuff, all right? And the last thing that's in here, security issues. We've already talked a little bit about this. Never trust your users. And that's not to rip on your users, but that's saying, suppose, make the assumption that the user doesn't know what they're doing, all right? How do you do that? How do you fight these? As they say there. Escape potentially dangerous characters. So in other words, I showed you an example earlier. Let me just get rid of this. Oops. Where I said inside of a form, if you can do this, I said that's actually unbelievably dangerous. Because if you can do that, then I can write myself a JavaScript in here just as well. Not an alert, but to do something, maybe remove records from a database, etc. But if you escape those characters, what ends up happening, if you do that, is this gets replaced with this. So this will say ampersand LT, ampersand GT, and again, ampersand LT, and ampersand GT. And to my knowledge, this, possibly at least, if your site is not secure, is executable. This should not be executable. All right? All right. Limit the incoming data to only what's necessary. Sandbox uploaded files. It says store them on a different server. So if somebody sends you garbage, they're just sending it out there. All right. As we've alluded to above, sending form data is easy, but securing an application can be tricky. If you've worked your way through these tutorials, You know how to mark up and style a form, do some client-side validation, and at least have an idea of what happens when you submit a form. There's some see alsos, and we're now done with this part. So next, I'm going to jump into the advanced topics where we will talk about how to build custom form controls, sending forms through JavaScript, and property compatibility table for form widgets. Now, when we get up to that, and I'm just going to show you this. So this thing now also is done. So I'm up to here. I'll finish that either later today or tomorrow and then jump into accessibility. And then we're going to be down towards the bottom. Just to show you, give you some kind of an idea of even what the hey I'm talking about here. Let me close this. I don't need Firefox open any longer. All right. But just to show you, this is welcome to my world here. This is where I'm basically storing all the MP4 files that I've created. This is the overview. We've done that already. We did the Learn Web Development. This is just one real short video. We did the HTML, we did the CSS, we did the JavaScript. We've done part 1 of the forms part, and we'll do part 2 next. Then what's left is accessibility, tools, and testing. With accessibility, I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to go through. I'll have to look at it. With tools and testing, same thing. I can tell you for sure, I'm not going to talk about React. I'm not going to talk about Ember. I'm not going to talk about Vue. I'm not going to talk about Svelte. I'm not going to talk about Angular. I'm not going to talk about those 5 things because they're not taught as part of the curriculum here at Rankin Technical College. I will go into Git and GitHub. I will go into cross-browser testing. On the server-side stuff, we won't go through the Django, but we will go through the Express and the Node stuff that's in there. And we'll probably also look at the further resources. So that's what we've got to look forward to. Be back with some more soon.